Celia, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
I've been thinking a lot and speaking a lot on this podcast about the future of talent acquisition teams and like the different skills and technologies we're going to adopt. It was really interesting in our prep call because you're in a project right now where you're kind of expanding the reach of your talent acquisition team over at Moss. I'm excited to get into that. Maybe you could give us like a high level of what the project is and how it sort of came about and why you're doing it.
Yeah, so the project is very much about how to get my team, so the talent acquisition team, kind of moving progressively towards managing all things talent. And for me, I want to do that like step by step. I think it's more manageable for a team if you kind of like start with the hiring and then say, okay, well, it's about probation, onboarding, and then the next thing is maybe feedback cycles and so on. So kind of like that's the vision, is like how do we expand the scope, but kind of not all in one go, all at once, but like have little testing grounds also to see how the team could kind of manage more scope. What are some people that can kind of like stretch that really easily? What are kind of the support mechanisms that are needed, and do that in kind of a way that feels a lot more manageable. How it came about, I think like a lot of other TA teams are asking themselves, like, knowing what we've gone through in terms of, some teams, as soon as hiring stops, like the hiring team has to go, like how do we future proof ourselves against these cycles, which we know and we've seen in the past. So how do we kind of show value beyond just like hiring when the company needs to hire, but also like thinking with AI and seeing some tools that are coming up and workflows that are kind of saying, well, we kind of couldn't replace like almost the end to end TA cycle with like AI automation. Is like, okay, this is going to come at some point. So how do we also make sure that if this does happen, we have value in kind of other areas, and then this is something that can help us with the tasks that can be automated, or where AI can kind of like help us, but still be able to kind of, like I said, add value beyond just hiring. That was kind of the inception of it. But like in a Moss context, we have a relatively small people team, and most of that people team is like talent acquisition. And it became very obvious that like we were sacrificing a little bit like the headcount needed for the hiring versus what is needed on, supporting managers, on kind of business partnering. And so we were like, well, instead of like choosing one over the other, how do we make the most out of the team we have? And how can we do that in a way that's like progressive, and we can kind of like test the limits a little bit about how far we can go. So that was like the crux of that discussion. And there's an element of like speed and agility. If it's the same people involved in like hiring those employees, then they have the context, they know in what was the need to hire this person. And so then being involved in probation check-ins and kind of the next steps also is a way to kind of talk a bit more about like speed and agility, generally speaking, versus siloed functions or people owning part of the employee life cycle.
Nice. I really conceptually like it, like thinking about talent as this sort of almost end-to-end journey or like continuous cycle versus, recruiting being up to the point of hire and then us taking our hands away and saying over to the people team, like this is
Yeah.
your responsibility now. My next question, I think you answered there, like, was like in some businesses who you might think this is a great idea, like how does that conversation go with the HR team that's almost very separate? Like are they upset that you're trying to take work off them? Do they want to give a work to you? But it sounds like you've built from the ground up of like TA and people as one combined
Yeah.
function.
Yeah, it was very much like a combined discussion with my peers that are in like people solutions or people ops, to be like, we know there's a need on hiring, and that's certainly like very much needed. We can't kind of say, well, hiring's just not going to happen or not as fast. But then the business partnering is something that the business, I think, has now come around, like the leadership, to say like it's actually really needed. But we're not in a position where we can suddenly hire like, 2, 4, 5 business partners. So yeah, how do we make the most out of it? And so it was a consolidated discussion. It didn't mean like we're taking away these things. It's like we're just going to work more closely together, and we'll pull you in when, we feel like we can't kind of manage this kind of conversation, or we want to do it the first time with someone from these other teams. So it was a very kind of like, it was a joint decision that we all took, and we're not taking away from anyone. If anything, there's a sense of relief that like others now can contribute, and this can scale beyond just one or two people that are currently doing this. Yeah.
And then how are you thinking about like the skill set within your team and the team members? Does everyone need to be like a real all-rounder who can go from sourcing to like development plans and retention, or are there like certain specialists within the team who maybe like have a bit of domain expertise in most different areas?
Yeah, so the approach we've taken is like we're focusing on the business alignment of each TA partner. So they're aligned to like a group of stakeholders and a group of businesses. And the rationale for this is they know those teams, those stakeholders. They've built that kind of acumen of what are the goals, what are the challenges, what do hiring managers need in that space, to say we build on top of that to get them to more of like a counseling and a coaching position within those businesses. So it's not right now, we haven't said like, okay, this is the person that's kind of owning all things related to internal mobility or whatnot. We've kind of haven't replicated those centers of expertise, but now it's I guess the interesting part where we're seeing where some TA partners very easily kind of move into this coaching, counseling part of their job, which most people that work in recruiting are used to. So there's a lot of these core skills that we have, like business acumen, emotional intelligence, curiosity. But what I'm seeing in my team is some of them are very comfortable kind of applying that to a different setting and maybe conversations they've never had with their hiring managers, and others are less so. And I don't think it's a huge knowledge gap, although we're going to run sessions that are around like, what are our feedback cycles, what are expectations around managers and things like that to kind of bridge the knowledge gap. But where I see more, there's a level of discomfort, I think, in being in this position where you're not the hiring expert anymore, and you kind of almost have to help the manager be better at their job. And that can feel kind of a bit uncomfortable because you're not a manager, you're not the expert in hiring anymore, but you have to find your style in terms of coaching and consulting where you're essentially like helping a manager do their core job better and building that trust where they can kind of come to you with situations that you've maybe never managed, but you're a sounding board, and then you can pull in kind of others to help. And that transition isn't as easy for everyone in the team. And now it's like, how do we build that confidence and also that capacity to coach? And part of this is also like change management as well, to kind of like reinforce and build skills. And it's a lot also around like communication to the team, to the manager. We're still learning. I think where I've seen the biggest stumbling blocks is more like this comfort of saying like, I'm now, my scope is this. And so I'm going to take this same role of consultant, but in a lot of other areas than hiring. And it's not a comfortable stretch for everyone involved, for sure.
Yeah, I guess it's not comfortable, but you hinted at it earlier. You're kind of future proofing your team for when large
Yeah.
parts of their existing role are automated, right? Like the consultative business partnering, as I understand it, is still going to be around for some time, right? So totally makes sense from that perspective. How are you thinking about, are you like concurrently implementing AI for some of those more automatable tasks, or is it kind of you're building the skill set and then AI comes second? Like how are you thinking about automation here?
Yeah. So it's running both in parallel. So AI and automation, like I see this as like an enabler to redeploy capacity towards like more business partnering work or more value added work. So for me, they kind of almost go together. If I just pile more on top of your workload. And I'm saying you still need to do all the interviewing, all the scheduling, all the sourcing, and you're not going to get any sort of efficiency gains from any sort of tooling. And then on top of that, you need to do the business partnering and all these probation check-ins. Like for me, it's like, let's have those two happen in parallel, where you can lean into more automation and AI to do your work in a more efficient, streamlined way, so that frees up kind of capacity for you to work on more of the business partnering. So I see those two things happening and enabling kind of each other in that way. So they're moving at a similar pace next to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then how are you like thinking about AI for like productivity and efficiency? Because I spoke to a few leaders and there's different approaches. Some are almost giving their team like free rein, like you're the ones who know the tasks you're doing day in and day out, and like almost challenging them to go and try like implement AI and automate them. And others are taking a more like top-down approach where they're looking at, okay, across the team, we have these and like this is where we're spending our time and these are the things we can automate across the team. So we'd love to hear a bit about how you're doing that.
Yeah. So it's a mix. I consciously focus on like the biggest efficiency drains to pilot more structured kind of experiments on AI, things like scheduling, things like sourcing. Like these are areas where we spend a lot of time and energy. And so some of this can be automated or can be enriched by AI. So let's start there in terms of like a structured experiments. But then let's also give the tools for the team to use AI in their day-to-day as well, and kind of find what works for them and what doesn't. So it's kind of both ways, because I'm always a bit conscious around like running pilots and then that being the only way to bring the team into this journey. Like I think then it becomes like, oh, this has been decided by leadership and I'm just going to follow this, versus saying like, yes, this is going to happen, but you're also expected to use all these new things and also exchange with the team and upskill others, because it's not just about what the company's pushing for you as an individual. This is something that you'll need to be able to use. And I was at a dinner a few weeks ago, and some companies are now like making it part of the assessment to say like you have to have AI fluency. And it's part of like one of the core criteria. So as an individual, you also have to make that effort on your own without kind of relying on what the company's putting in place. So we're doing both at the same time.
Yeah, I think both make sense, but like I certainly agree on your last point. Like IC should be at least like experimenting and getting used to the tools themselves. And some of the coolest like internal tools I've seen built are like by ICs, because they're the one that like understand the problem deeply, right? They're the person that's doing the task day in and day out, and they can really see how to automate it or implement AI, whatever it may be. So totally agree. How's this project going then, and how do you sort of measure success for anyone thinking of doing something similar?
I mean, it's early days, and like I said, we started with these probation check-ins that fall within TA and kind of gathering data on, how fast is someone getting to full productivity, or how much faster they're getting to full productivity, or how much more in terms of all the people in probation, how many more, like the percentage of people that are flagged as green, being on track within their probation. So there is a view, of course, of collecting data and being able to say that, the time we spend checking in on probations is adding value to the business, because people are either productive a lot faster because of it, or we're just able to bring a higher percentage of people to kind of this green state where they're on track and they're trending well within their probation. Because if we're not able to articulate that impact, it's going to be very easy for my leadership team to say, hey, what I care about is productivity and like hires per TA partner. And you're not able to tell me that all this time they're spending on checking in on probations or coaching managers is adding value. So like, I'm not okay with this little experiment anymore. The reality is right now, like I don't have a wonderful metric to say like, oh, there's a bigger proportion of people that are trending green, or our BDRs are productive 2 to 3 weeks faster because of this, but it is early days. So I think these changes in terms of attrition or productivity, like they'll take a while to see, and we'll have to look at each cohort and how is that trending over time. But there are other things that are showing a story in terms of our focus on attrition, our focus on productivity that are related to hiring. So less attrition within probation, higher ARR per employee. So things like that are showing like a general trend, but that is hard to kind of pin down to what my team is doing exactly now. But, the intent is once we've been in this process for 3-4 months that we can start showing kind of a trend with these cohorts. But we do it's the reality of this kind of experiment. There needs to be some sort of indication that this is adding value to the business.
Yeah, attribution always somewhat difficult for things like this, right? But I think logically it makes sense if someone delivers a great candidate experience and then you join the company and that same person's then giving you the employee experience, right? Your first few months, logically that makes sense. This is a nice continuation to that experience, right? Really interesting to hear about your projects. Let's think outside of that, quite a general question, but what's exciting you in the TA space right now? Could be tools, tech, trends. What are you looking at?
Yeah. It's AI, but what I am geeking out a little bit now is how the investing kind of landscape has really doubled down on everything AI, and how that is impacting companies that aren't in the AI space. We're not an AI company. And so our investing kind of prospects are heavily affected by this focus on AI and these huge Series A rounds, and how, the criteria for companies that are outside of this space to get extra funding is changing as a result. So we need to show something different than what we maybe relied on the past to, get interest or funding. But for me, it's my entry route into AI is through these investing podcasts specifically. So I'm listening to 20 VC, or there's an Excel Spotlight on podcasts where now all of these podcasts are around AI. So I'm kind of really interested in this space and hearing kind of how this has dramatically shifted and how these companies are now in the spotlight and what they're enabling product teams to do, where you hear about a product manager that doesn't need an engineering team anymore and is just using Lovable, and they can kind of get a V1 out. So that I'm really interested. And then I'm doing my own experimentation with AI, just the level of analysis that you can get through big data sets that I just could never really get into. So it's a lot of experimentation now to see let's see if I can put these feedback forms and see what are the skills that are undercovered in interviews. Of course, you have to take it with a pinch of salt, but it's pretty amazing to see kind of what you can do now in 10 minutes, which I probably would have never been able to do without an analyst before. So those two things are kind of top of mind for me.
Just to randomly tie that back to recruiting, so I think it's really interesting what you're saying. Even just 2-3 years ago, right? Candidates want to join the sexier tech companies, let's say, and typically that would probably be a fintech SaaS business.
Yeah.
Now you're right, funding's piling into AI, so I imagine that's where what candidates are seeing as these more sexy tech businesses. So do you think it's almost going to be harder, or there's going to be more convincing for the non-AI more classical tech companies are going to have to go through?
Yeah, I definitely think so. It's not something that I've necessarily kind of seen right now and could say it's actually happening. But I do think that just the mindset and the shift is going to happen very much so towards these companies that are sexier. They're the future of work. They're building the stuff that's enabling all these other tech companies to scale and to be more efficient. So I do think we're going to have a harder time attracting talent as a result, or we'll attract different types of talent. So yeah, it's visible in the investing round, and I think we'll start seeing also with candidates, and that will trickle through. So yeah, we'll have maybe a harder time attracting candidates and competing for these companies that are part of the startup and scale up ecosystem, and to a much larger degree than before.
Yeah, super interesting. Celia, thanks for coming on, telling us all about your projects. I hope it continues to go well. And yeah, speak to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much.